Welcome back. This is my first ride on my 2025 YZ250FX. I'm going to share some of my first impressions here, but I only have about an hour of ride time on the bike so far, so I need to get more time on it to get into more detail. Experience and skill level is always important to consider when someone's giving their opinion on a bike, so if you're new to this channel, I'll provide some background for myself right after this hill climb. I'm 52 years old and I've been riding off-road for 8 years and racing hare scrambles, sprint enduros, and enduros for 7 years. Can't believe there's still snow on the ground. It's almost 60 degrees. I advanced through C-Class and I'm currently racing in the B-Vet class, specifically B50+. This is my fourth Yamaha 250 since 2017. I've had a 2017 WR250F, a 2021 YZ250FX, a 2023 YZ250FX, and now this 25 YZ250FX. I've done a fair amount of customization work to this bike prior to riding it, and I have a video outlining that process, and I'll put a link in the video description. Alright, let's try some single track. The 2025 YZ250FX has been redesigned utilizing the new frame, chassis, and bodywork that first came out on the 2023 YZ450F. Those changes got applied to the YZ250F in 2024. Now the 2025 YZ250FX finally gets those updates. I'm riding the bike on stock suspension today. I haven't had time to take it to fast lap yet, so this gives me a good opportunity to provide feedback on the stock suspension. Yamaha has noted that they've updated the suspension settings for 2025. For the 2020 to 2024 generation of YZ250FX, the stock suspension valving is very stiff, especially for the average rider. I know some A-class guys that really like the stock valving, but for most B and C-class riders, it's too harsh and needs to be softened up beyond what can be done with the clickers. During my first ride here on my 2025, I noticed that the stock suspension is much better than the previous generation. The valving feels more compliant. Take a look at this rocky section of trail, you can kind of tell how it's handling that. I wouldn't say it's plush, but it's very rideable for someone at my skill level. I feel like I could actually race on the suspension and not feel like I'd been beat up by it. I did adjust the compression clickers on both the forks and the shock to their softest setting, but I was never able to get the stock suspension on my 21 or 23 model to feel this good with just clicker adjustments. Now I'm still going to get the suspension on this bike revalved because Steve at Fast Lap Racing Suspension has my custom valving really dialed in. But I wanted to note here, for those that don't get custom suspension work done, that in my opinion, this stock suspension could work for the average rider. One of the most common questions I get is about what maps I run and in what situations, etc. My answer to that is probably frustrating to some, but the truth is I rarely change maps. I like the Kiefer hard-hitting map, and I've been running it for years, and I rarely change it. I don't really want the bike performance characteristics to change. I like to know how the bike is going to react to throttle inputs, and when I run other maps, it seems to throw off my rhythm for what I'm expecting the bike to do. Now the GYTR app has some additional options for maps that I should probably play around with and get to in a future video, but for now I apologize to everybody that's asked me about maps and gotten the same boring answer. I'm running the Kiefer hard-hitting map. This is a map I've been running for a long time in my 21 model and my 23 model, now my 25 model. I really like it. I rarely change it. A big difference I noticed on this 2025 bike while riding is the narrow feeling of the bike. The bike is much more narrow up front around the radiator shrouds, and that narrow feeling is very evident when riding the bike. It makes the bike feel more maneuverable. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's really noticeable if you're used to the previous generation of YZ250FX. I really like that more narrow feeling. Another change that I really like is that they finally routed the front brake line behind the front number plate. On the previous models, they had the brake line routed in front of the front number plate. Because of that, they had this giant piece of plastic that came off the number plate and wrapped around the bars, and that was to prevent the brake line from going behind the number plate. I always cut that big piece off of my other bikes because I thought it looked goofy, but I did have the brake line go behind the number plate a couple of times. Anyway, they really cleaned this up. That previous design also interfered with some of the aftermarket light kits for the front of these bikes, so this is just a much cleaner, much better setup for the front brake line. One thing I'm not really a fan of, and this is kind of nitpicky, but there's not really a good handhold here for getting the bike on the stand. There's not much space between the silencer and the fender. I rode a 2025 YZ250F a couple of weeks ago, and that bike was extremely loud. I was a little worried that this bike would be as loud as that, but thankfully it's not. The sound of this bike is similar to my 2023 YZ250FX, and it actually may be a little bit quieter. The silencer is pretty bulky, but I'll take that. Thankfully it's not ear-splitting loud like the YZ250F. There have been a lot of complaints about the low-end power of the YZ250F following the redesign in 2024, but I haven't felt any lack of power with this bike. The power delivery feels exactly like my 23 YZ250FX. I have no complaints about the power at all, whether low, mid, or top end. I don't think I have the skill level to fully take advantage of the power of this bike, but specifically on low-end power, it doesn't feel any different than my previous bike. I bought this bike from Longshore Cycle Center in Florence, Alabama. I highly recommend Longshore Cycle if you're in the market for a Yamaha, Kawasaki, or Honda. Longshore Cycle Center is a multi-generation family-owned business. They're heavily involved in off-road racing, and they understand off-road bikes and riders very well. They're a sponsor of SECA Racing, and the best part is they don't play games with customers when it comes to pricing. Those are my first impressions of my 2025 Yamaha YZ250FX. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll leave you with a couple more minutes of this outstanding single track at the Ridge Resort in Springville, Alabama. Thanks for watching.